Warning! If you have clicked on this video expecting a 7 or 8 minute quick run through of the dimensions and specifications of the Spyderco Domino and thought maybe you'd listen to a reviewer talk for a few minutes about how much he likes his new Domino, and you thought maybe that would make you feel better about the $200 purchase you just made while you're waiting for the postman to arrive, you've come to the wrong place. Hi gang, Rob here. It is the evening of 3 October 2013. And yeah, the introduction leads you to believe something that's probably true. I don't think this is going to be a short one, boys. What we have for you tonight is a knife review of the Spyderco Domino. Interesting knife, I must say. And let me fill in some of the background for you, as you've come to expect on the Apostle P channel. The Domino, released in 2013, it is a new knife, seems to be wading into some pretty deep water for a small knife. You know, over the last couple of years, as many custom knife makers and even some production knife companies have gone full bore into the future, there have been some features on folding knives that have become the darling children, the buzzwords, the must-haves of the day if you want to be cool in your folding knife choice. Let's talk about some of them. How about titanium frame lock? Of course, it can't be a high-quality folding knife without a titanium frame lock. Well, you got to have modern powdered metal technology super steel blade. Got to have that. Let's see. Carbon fiber. That's really cool. You got to have carbon fiber if you want to sell knives nowadays. And then, you know, how about pivots? You know, you can't just use good old Teflon or phosphor bronze washers anymore. If you're a folding knife worth your salt, you got to be riding on a ball bearing pivot of some kind, don't you? Yeah, apparently that's true. Well, as most of you who watch my channel know, I don't necessarily buy all that. You know, Kershaw under the ZT flag has sold a lot of knives in the last couple of years because they have sort of designed by features. They have made knives including all this stuff that they can print in their internet listings and in their catalogs, and it makes people want to pay a lot of money for their knives. And you know, we can debate till the cows come home the value in all those features and aspects of knives, but you know, there's some good in all that. And unlike Benchmade, unlike SOG, unlike Gerber, Spyderco has decided that they are our huckleberries. They'll play. The Glessers can wade into that pool, and they have. They did it first with the Spyderco Southern flipper, designed by Brad Southern, and now young Eric Glesser, son of Sal, has decided to throw his maker's mark into the ring. Let me see if I can find his maker's mark. There it is. Yeah, not a famous custom knife maker, not R.J. Martin or Todd Begg. But Eric Glesser, dutiful second generation knife maker at Spyderco, has said, yeah, you guys want a titanium frame lock, you want carbon fiber, you want a super steel, you want a bearing pivot, you want a flipper, I can make one of those. But of course, you know, it just looks like a Spyderco, doesn't it? It really can't be that great. Certainly it can't be as good as its competitor from the Northwest, similarly sized full titanium zero tolerance ZT0801. Can't be that good, can it? Of course not. No famous designer name on this blade. Well, let's just talk about all that, shall we? And before we get into it, let's go over some quick dimensions and materials while we're at it. The Domino by Spyderco sports a 3.13 inch leaf-shaped blade. A handle 4.55 inches long. Let's do our math real quick. That gives us an overall length of 7.68 inches. Cutting edge on that 3 1/8 inch blade, from there to there, 2.89 inches. Blade thickness, I would imagine, is 1/8 of an inch pre-grind. They listed it on Spyderco's website at 0.118 inches. Handle thickness, 0.464 inches, a little over 7/16 of an inch. Weight for this 3 1/8 inch bladed knife, a not too skinny 4.1 ounces, but not overly heavy either. Just enough weight to feel solid. Blade steel. Not your everyday CPM S30V or S35VN or even LMAX. We've got a rather interesting steel. Let's see if we can focus. This is Carpenter CTS XHP. We'll talk about that a little more here in just a minute. The handle materials. On the lock side, of course, we have titanium, probably 6AL4V, and finished in a beautiful acid stonewash finish, which is proving to be very durable. On the other side, we have a titanium liner covered with Spyderco's properly identified this time G10 with carbon fiber laminate in a cubic check pattern, reminiscent of dominoes, I suppose. Pocket clip is the PVD coated black clip that comes from only one place in Spyderco's lineup. Taichung, Taiwan. I love the clip and I love the finish. It's black, but it's not painted. The finish just doesn't wear off. I've been carrying my Gale Bradley with this same clip for a couple of years. It looks like brand new. I'm sure this one will wear the same way. Let's talk about this steel before we get too much farther. CTS XHP is produced by Carpenter here in the United States. As I said, it is a powdered metallurgy steel, also known in their lineup as 440 XH, which would be 440 extra hard, I guess you could say. It's also referred to as CTS XHP. Not only is it a high carbon, high hardness 440C, it could also be referred to as a corrosion resistant D2. The other chemistry in the steel is very similar, the variables being percent carbon and chromium. The trace elements are also a little different, but basically you've got 1.6% carbon like D2, but 16% chromium, much more like 440C. D2 will usually carry 11.5 to 12% chromium, and it's sort of a semi-stainless steel. The XHP should be more stainless than D2. It is capable of achieving hardnesses of about Rockwell on the C scale 64, almost as hard as D2 will get. Here's my experience with it so far. As you saw in a factory sharpness video I did a couple nights ago, the edge was pretty good from the factory. Of course, No knife I've ever owned has an edge from the factory quite good enough to suit me. So this one has met the Edge Pro, which is kind of good. I like to sharpen a knife before I do a review because sharpening a blade tells me a lot about the steel. And here's how I would characterize it. It is a little more difficult to sharpen than D2 because of the chromium. Even very hard, high carbon steels sharpen easily if they're not sort of gummed up by other stuff like chromium. And that extra 4% or so of chromium does make sharpening a bit more of a challenge, but with a little patience, I think it takes an edge darn near as fine as D2, and it sure takes a nice polish, doesn't it? We'll see how durable it is over time, and we'll see how rust resistant it is over time. I did notice when I tape the blade while I'm sharpening, there's some of this satin finish showing between the edge and the tape, and I did notice that it did stain just a little bit with my water and abrasive and metal slurry. Not very much, came right off with a little bit of flitz. So I don't think it's like H1 stainless, even S30V, but more corrosion resistant than D2. Okay, let's talk about the mechanics a little bit. You know, it wouldn't be a good frame lock in 2013 if it didn't have a ball bearing pivot. And the Domino does indeed have, the normal urethane race with tiny ball bearings on either side, much like the Kershaw KVT bearing system, with one huge difference. And if you watched my, in my knife how-to playlist, you'll find a video about folding knife pivots, what's hype and what's good. I can't remember what I called it, but you can find it if you look. One of my big knocks on these ball bearing pivots in titanium frame locks is that when you have these little ball bearings at about 64 Rockwell spinning around in a trench dug in relatively soft 45 Rockwell or so titanium, over time they're going to wear a ditch in that titanium. You're going to develop blade play, bearings are going to start rattling around in handles, etc., etc. Well, when I took this apart after sharpening to clean and lubricate, I found something very interesting. The Glessers saw me coming, and although the grooves for the bearings are in the titanium on both sides of the blade does not have a trench cut in it. They ride on the full tang surface of the blade. Both sides of the titanium in the groove cut for the bearings have hardened, very thin stainless steel washers between the titanium and the ball bearings that become nicely burnished and shiny and smooth for the balls to ride on, and the more you use it, the smoother it gets, and dimensionally it just stays the same. Pretty cool. Sets it apart from just about every other flipper on the market except the Southern, which uses exactly the same construction. Pretty neat. Okay, let's look at this lock for a minute. Oh, that's the other thing. If you're going to make a frame lock in 2013 that's any good at all, you've got to have a hardened stainless steel lock bar insert. So you have steel on steel. I get that, and I really agree with it, as long as your lock geometry is right, so your lock bar doesn't slip off your blade tang. And in the case of this knife, I'm going to put some negative pressure on this blade, and you guys watch, you see if that lock moves at all. Applying pressure, rock solid, right at 50% of lockup. It's a bit of an optical illusion looking at it from this angle. It looks like a little more than 50, but it's not. It's just about exactly 50%, right where it was when I got it. I've flipped it a few hundred times in the last 4 days since I've owned it. It is well done. Okay guys, before I get too deep into the specifics and nuances of the Domino, I wanted to give you a quick size comparison between some other fairly popular EDC blades, both less expensive, but very similar in size, one Spyderco and one Kershaw. Domino in the middle, of course, and the overall length compared to the Kershaw Knockout is almost exactly the same. The overall length of the Knockout just a little longer, but that's almost all handle length. Blade length is about exactly the same as the Domino, although you can see the cutting edge comes back a little farther on the Knockout, so you do have more effective cutting edge on that knife, but very similar in size and weight. The Knockout is a little thinner than the Domino in pocket and does carry deeper. And then over here on the right we have the Spyderco Paramilitary 2, a much longer knife, I guess you could say. The handle, oh gosh, maybe 3/8 of an inch longer than the Domino, and then with its 3 7/16 inch blade, the overall length, pushes out to about a 1/2 inch longer than the Domino. Carries just a little more deeply in pocket, does the Para 2, and its thickness is thinner, but not by much. I mean, not much at all. I think the Domino is a little more pocketable knife than the Para 2. It just seems to accommodate your hand going down into your pocket a little better than the Paramilitary 2 does. I kind of wish I hung onto my Sage long enough to do this review, but it is on its way to Toad Sticker, the new owner of my old Sage 1. Suffice it to say that the Domino is just a little bigger in every dimension. The shape of the Domino is very reminiscent of a Sage with some slight differences. Now, as we move along here, before we do, I just want you to take a very, very close look at this knife. Slowly, just look it over. We're going to pan across the controversial cubic check carbon fiber G10 laminate. Since I'm a left-hander and my clip goes on this side, I think it breaks it up and the pattern doesn't dominate so much. It was very hard to tell watching videos and seeing pictures what this would look like in person. But let me just tell you that although its pattern is a little polarizing, I like it. And I find its texture to be very, very similar than the carbon fiber laminate on the Gale Bradley and on the Sage 1. The pattern's not the same, but it's about the same level of texture. I think it's just a great next step, next evolutionary step in that material. Something different. I kind of like it. Let's move along now to this blade. This is a Taichung, Taiwan-produced Spyderco, of course, so you get this relatively coarse satin finish. There's not a Scotch-Brite part of this process. It's finished at, I don't know, I would guess 600 grit. The grinding marks in this blade are actually able to be felt as you drag your thumbnail across them. That presents some issues, although it is extremely attractive. Just keep looking as we go here. The full flat ground blade comes to a really, really nice tip. Very pointy tip for such a broad knife. Just take a look at the grinding, the machining, the fit and finish of assembly. Look closely. Unless you have a better eye than I, can't find a flaw in this knife. I just cannot say enough about Spyderco's maker in Taichung. Those guys are just amazingly precise. In a $200 knife, the level of construction, machining and fit and finish, well, that's darn near on a par with knives that cost twice as much. Take a look at the blade centering. And I would dare say you could pick up any domino on any shelf and it's going to be right where this one is, right down the middle. Beautiful. Now let's get into some of the nuances of this knife and what makes it so great. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is its action in general and how it flips. And first, let's back up to this satin finish just a minute. This coarse satin finish, and you guys who are Sage owners are going to know what I'm talking about. When this knife is brand new, and this goes for the Sage series too, you're going to feel as you open and close the knife a level of grittiness as the ball bearings in the pivot, and as it has in common with the Sage series, where the detent ball rides on the blade tang, you feel every one of those grind lines or striations, just like you do with your thumbnail as you're running it down the blade. Now, as you use it, important to note those ball bearings and the detent ball bearing just a little harder than the steel. And over time, as it opens and closes, it will burnish those grind marks out and the knife will become smooth as butter. I don't know, I probably have 300 cycles on this mechanism and mine is just about there. I'm not going to call that a negative, it's just a break-in characteristic of the knife. It's worth putting up with because the finish is so beautiful. Although, I would say if you're using a steel that has some propensity to stain or corrode, like a Gale Bradley and CPM M4, you're going to get some staining. Don't know if this XHP will do that. The CPM steels don't seem to stain at all in this finish. Okay, now let's talk about this action for a minute. First of all, notice that little notch right here where the spine meets the front of the knife and right in front of the flipper. It looks kind of odd, doesn't it? Why wouldn't you just come out and start your curve? Well, young Eric thinks of everything. This flipper can be used either as a drawback flipper or a push flipper. If you're going to draw it back, just look here. Your finger lies right in there, right on that little flat, and just pull it right back along the spine. Out she comes. If you want to use it as a push down type, just apply a little tension. Out she comes. Either way is fine. Works great both ways. Here's another little seeming oddity in the handle where the forward choil is. Again, we don't have a smooth arc here at the front of the handle. We have an arc and then a reverse arc and then this point where the finger guard is formed. Well, that is so that forward finger choil is smooth and concave. Right where your finger lies is that tiny little inside radius in the front of that handle. You know, some of these modern knives, and I'm going to beat on ZT for a while, they've got all these buzzword features. They look great on paper. You put them in your hand and they're horrendous. The 560 and 561 series I speak of specifically. They're jimped, buddy. I'll tell you what, they got jimping. Well, when you open the knife with the flipper, they rip the end of your index finger off. They have jimping in this area of the knife if you're doing any kind of hard cutting in a hammer grip. As that knife pivots in your hand, it's ripping these two fingers wide open. I think I was watching I can't remember, Cliff Stamp I think did a video talking about knives like that, and he called them designs by picture. They have all the right features, they look really cool, and you get them in hand and use them and they're horrendous. The Domino is definitely not in that category of knives. You look at this knife in certain ways and you go, why did they do that? And then you pick it up and use it and you go, oh, that's why they did that. Here's another one. Look at it closed. Well, that looks funny for a Spyderco, doesn't it? Isn't the round hole supposed to be centered in this finger choil area? Why is it so far back? It's even occluded by the scale on the handle a little bit, and it looks funny, even when it's open. Now it looks like it's too far forward, doesn't it? They must have just drilled them in the wrong place. Well, no, they didn't. When you're going to use a standard thumb hole deployment, and you put your thumb in the hole and you let your hand fall where it should, watch what happens to the flipper. Huh. It barely misses the index finger, doesn't it? Even if you're going to flick it out quickly. It barely misses the index finger. What would happen, you think, if you move that round hole an eighth of an inch closer to the pivot? Yeah, you guessed it. Good job, Spyderco. Let's talk about the jimping on the knife a minute. It is standard issue Taichung, and frankly, the Taichung jimping generally is not as good as the Golden Colorado jimping. There is jimping in the finger choil, which is pretty good. The jimping on the spine or the thumb ramp, it almost seems like it's cut the wrong way, or at least dead straight. Doesn't provide a lot of traction going forward, but it's enough. You know, and for an EDC knife, it's plenty enough. Especially if you're in this forward grip. If you're back here, you know, you're never going to get that far anyway. Your thumb actually lies just on the beginning of that jimping. Here's an area that I think they went a little overboard. On the steel lock bar insert, they've jimped that thing, and frankly, it hurts my thumbs. It doesn't need to be that sharp. And there's a lot of lock bar tension on this little knife. I've been carrying this thing for most of the last 4 days. Both thumbs are pretty raw, and my thumbs are not inexperienced, as you probably can expect. You know, I think they could have made that smooth, you know, put a little chamfer on the inside edge. It would have been just as effective. That's maybe, that and the grittiness and pivot when the knife is brand new are probably the only two knocks you're going to hear me give this knife. A lot of guys knock the cubic check carbon fiber laminate. A lot of guys knock the pocket clip because it doesn't ride low enough in your pocket. Both of those things do not bother me. They certainly aren't deal breakers, even if you don't really prefer them. The pocket clip, of course, is four-way positionable. I'm a lefty and I like tip up, so you see where mine is. Here's the neat thing about this. It is a flipper, and it's a pretty good flipper. It's not the most, you know, it's not the most touch the flipper and it flies out knife I've ever handled. My Browse Division is more like that than this knife is. The ZT801 more like that than this knife is. But it's not a flipper that you have to work very hard at. You know, the knife doesn't fall closed by gravity, but it's pretty free. Again, a lot of lock bar tension on this knife. Spyderco kind of, they believe in making the important things good at the expense of frivolous things. You know, if they put less tension on this lock bar, the knife would close, it would fall closed more easily. but then the lock wouldn't be as secure, especially with the steel insert. You know, if you're titanium on steel, you get that little bit of stick that titanium gives you. If you're steel on steel, you better have really good lock geometry and a lot of lock bar tension to keep that lock from sliding off to the left and the knife closing. I might have just cut myself. Doggone. Okay, so let's talk about this deployment variety we have with this knife. And you've seen me flip both ways. You've seen me thumb the knife open. It's even a great middle finger flicker. I don't know if I got enough room to Spidey drop this knife from this camera angle. Let's see. Yeah, not really without hitting the table, but you get the point. How is it in hand? There again, amazing. Standard saber grip, beautiful, super secure, not going forward. Look where my fingers interface with the grooves in the knife. Index finger, main choil, middle finger, ring finger, pinky not quite falling off the back, just right there in a very comfortable position. When I go forward, look at that. I mean, just perfect. Now the middle finger is in that large first groove. My last two fingers just naturally wrap. It's great. Hammer grip. Got two positions for that. I can come back here for leverage. I can come forward for fine work. Very comfortable in both. Don't feel the pocket clip. I mean, I can feel that it's there, but it's definitely not going to be a hot spot in either position. Go reverse grip. Super comfortable. I mean, super comfortable. It's like they took a clay impression of the human hand in a bunch of positions and melted them all together. Got that right, and then made a great looking knife after they got that stuff right. Just amazing. The blade grind is pretty thin behind the edge. Wipe again. Pretty thin behind the edge. My resharpen of this knife was done with a secondary bevel of 15 degrees and a really, really slight micro bevel at 18. And you can see it's not very broad, my polished edge, which means we've got a pretty thin grind at the edge. Great little slicer. Shall we see if it cuts? Let's look for a minute at the original edge, some footage from my first video on this knife. We'll roll that in now. Watch and listen, and then we'll compare to this edge. So take a look, guys. This is some relatively flimsy phone book paper. Not copy paper. Okay, so remember what that looked like and sounded like, and now let's try it with this edge from the Apostle P sharpening bench off the Edge Pro. Let's do a couple slices first. Sound any different? Now let's push cut a little. Not quite in that spot. Yeah, that's good. Go out here to the tip. Pretty good. Let's finish him off. I think it's a little better than it was new, and it should be a little more durable. Of course, there are a couple areas that I know aren't perfect, and I will work on them, but I'm not going to tell you where they are. So, the Domino right now is a hotly sought after little knife. It and its main competitor right now, the ZT-0801, are selling like hotcakes. Nobody can keep them in stock. I think maybe the price on this knife is a little inflated. I had to pay $203 for this one. And guys, I think it is my own internal pressure to run this channel that made me do that. This is a knife that I know a lot of you are interested in. And I kind of felt like I owed you a review. And things worked out, you know, in the sharpening business and Google AdSense, that I had the money available to do that without harming the family budget. And it's a knife I probably would have waited on till it sort of came down to earth price-wise, but I really, really wanted to get this review out there because I know that, you know, there might be 3 or 4 of you who actually wait to hear what I have to say before you pull the trigger on a knife, especially when this expensive. So I wanted to be able to weigh in and give you a point of reference. And you know, there are a lot of things about this knife that just make it a Spyderco. You look at it, you wouldn't have to see a bug logo on the blade or the pocket clip to know, hey, that must be the new Spyderco. But there are enough things that are different and new about this knife and really good that make it, well, in my collection, a knife that replaced the Sage. It's just enough bigger, it's just enough better, and the aspects of it that are sort of modern developments in the making of folding knives, some of which I don't really even like ball bearing pivots, they're executed so well that I've maybe changed my mind a little bit about those features. I mean, I love phosphor bronze washers and a well-executed, well-toleranced and dimensioned knife. I still think that kind of construction will last longer than ball bearings, but you can't do ball bearings any better than this. You just can't. It's really a quite amazing little knife. I think they'll settle in at probably the $175, $180 price range after this initial flurry passes. And at that price level, they are a bargain. At $200, still worth it. I mean, if you think this knife jazzes you, if it turns you on, I would buy one. I don't see Spyderco discontinuing the Domino or making it a sprint run of any kind, but you never know. If it looks like you want one, if this knife seems to fit your EDC or fit a spot in your collection that has a hole in it, pull the trigger, guys. Just get one. Quality of materials, quality of fit and finish, and construction are so good. It really is, it's the latest best Spyderco can do. And the best Spyderco can do is always pretty darn good. I know this is a platform that's getting customized a lot right now. People are chucking these cubic check carbon fiber scales. Mine's not going anywhere. I think it's what makes the knife a Domino. It's the signature of the knife, and I don't hate it. I kind of like it actually. So it's going to stick around, especially with that beautiful pocket clip against it. I think it just goes really well together. Not really much about this knife I can complain about. So, Eric Glesser, my compliments to you, sir. In my eyes, you have now reached knife-making Jedi status. I hope your father is proud, because he should be. He really, really should be. Great job. That's all I have on this little beauty. So grace to you all and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the word is sharp.